So I pulled out his video. I listened to it again. I was able to find all his places that he was during his escape and survival. And there were a lot of places.
Okay.
And I decided to return to Germany, which that's number one, very audacious for someone like
Very much
me
so. Yeah.
to go back to where it all happened. He was born in Germany. And he swore he would never go back, but I decided to do it.
Welcome to the Audacious Living Podcast, hosted by my man, Audley Stevenson, the Odd Man.
Greetings and salutations. Welcome to the Audacious Living Podcast, where our goal is to inspire and empower our listeners to live their best audacious lives. I'm thrilled that you're here to be with us and join us as we go on this journey of embracing audacity. And when you think of embracing audacity, it's like climbing a mountain. It requires courage, determination, and a willingness to take risks. Just as you reach the summit, it brings a sense of accomplishment and exhilaration. Living audaciously can lead to personal growth and fulfillment. Today, we have the privilege of speaking with Irene Stern Frielich, who is a writer and speaker focused on intergenerational trauma and healing. Through her memoir, Shattering Stars, Healing Hearts, My Father's Holocaust Survival Story, Irene shares her transformative journey of reconnecting with her family's past and finding healing. Irene's experience sheds light on the power of confronting traumas and finding healing in unexpected places. Hey, Irene, thank you for joining me here today on the Audacious Living Podcast. I appreciate you making the time like this. Thank you.
Thank you, Audley. I'm so excited to be here today. I love audaciousness, so I can't wait to hear what you have to say and share.
Well, this is the place for it, right? If you're looking to be audacious, we've got permission to be as free as you want here. Not a problem at all. We spend so much time on this podcast, and encouraging people to embrace that spirit of audacity and to be bold and take risks and step out of your comfort zone and demonstrate courageousness in your actions. Because on the other side of all those things, there's all sorts of greatness that lies, but we've still got to take that step forward. And all that step forward is that the courage to do so is sometimes what a lot of people struggle with, because it takes courage. And something that you certainly can resonates with you with respect to taking that step forward and having the courage to do so through your own personal story and your story of the Holocaust and from your parents as part of your overall story. So maybe as a starting point, we can get you to open up in terms of, because you've got a book and as well too, so there's a lot that goes on to your story. If you can sort of let us in a little bit and tell us about what's happening in your world.
Yeah, thank you for asking that. So that's a big question, and I'll try to keep it as focused as possible. But in this stage of my audaciousness, I guess, because I started up a business also, which was pretty risky.
Okay.
But in this stage, I came to realize I needed to unravel more about my father's Holocaust survival story. So he was a child when the Holocaust began, and he never really talked about it very much. So there were these secrets that permeated my childhood that I didn't quite know the details of his story. And he died in 1994. And he left me what's called a testimony video in which he told his story. He was interviewed by someone telling his story, telling things I had never heard from him directly. And so when I first listened to it back then, I couldn't quite follow the chronology. I didn't understand the places he was mentioning. But then in 2017, shortly around the time of the elections in this country, in the US, stuff started getting worse. There was more anti-Semitism. There was more acts of violence against people of color, especially against Black people. And it was feeling to me like 1930s Germany. And it was time for me to unravel my father's story. So I pulled out his video. I listened to it again. I was able to find all his places that he was during his escape and survival. And there were a lot of places. And I decided to return to Germany, which that's number one, very audacious for someone like
Very much
me
so. Yeah.
to go back to where it all happened. He was born in Germany. And he swore he would never go back, but I decided to do it. And, I was pretty much shaking the whole time during my first trip there. But then the other audacious aspect of what I did was actually retracing his survival route. I went into his home where he grew up, where he was born and grew up, which it was a home and business. So it is still a business. It is currently owned by the descendant of the man who obtained the business and the home. And this man still lives there. So that was pretty audacious. So I started doing all these crazy things. But what happened in the process over a year or so is I encountered a sense of healing that I didn't even know was a thing or was possible. I was healing from this intergenerational trauma, which there's a lot written about nowadays. And I didn't even have that term to understand what that was until around the time of these trips. But had I not taken those risks of going to Germany, of learning a little German, which was really emotionally hard for me, of engaging with this man who owns the store where my parents used to live, if I hadn't done any of these things and taken these risks, I would not be a transformed person that I feel I am today, a couple of years, 5 years after those initial trips.
Very, very powerful. Yeah, it's extremely powerful, especially when you come face to face with the trauma that you just described a little bit. Irene, I'd like to go back just for a moment here to that sort of process of making the decision to go to Germany. I don't want to like. I think that's a significant, right? And audacious, absolutely no question about that. And I'd love if you maybe could describe sort of the thought process and what was going on, and even how you were feeling about doing making such an important trip.
Yeah, my stomach was in knots for a lot of it because I knew my father and my Oma, my grandmother, so his mother, who I knew well and was, with him for it was also her escape route. I knew they would not approve, right? Because they were clear about that in some way. I knew it was not okay to go. But at the same time, I felt like, this is my ancestry. I consider myself German. If you asked what my ethnicity is, I would say I'm German, not Hungarian, which is what my mother was. I just so align with that. So I felt like I really wanted to go to the places of my ancestors and kind of deal with this very icky feeling that I had. And I even, when I was looking into where we were going to fly into and out of, I didn't even want to fly into Germany. I was looking at ways to fly into Amsterdam and then drive and then fly out of Amsterdam, but it just didn't make sense. So I finally gave in because my husband and one of my sons was with me, and I didn't want to put them through that turmoil because they didn't have the same baggage that I had.
Yes.
So I just kind of made myself do it. I like somewhat willingly, somewhat unwillingly, like, of course it was my decision. So it was willing. And, I even learned some words so that hoping that I would meet this man whose ancestor obtained my family's home and business. I wanted to be able to speak with him in German. So I learned enough German to say some key words and phrases to him to let him know who I was. So I kind of made myself do these things. But shortly before my first trip, I had a dream that was really significant to me. In this dream, my Oma was there. And, Oma didn't always say so much, but you knew if she approved or didn't approve, We all have someone like that in our family. So in my dream, I told her I'm going to Germany, and she looked at me. She didn't say anything. She just looked at me. And when I woke up, I felt like she was really there. And I took away from that, she's not happy I'm going, but she is supporting me going because she didn't say don't go in my dream. And that subconscious or that visit from my Oma really helped me to feel like okay, I should be doing this. So that was another thing that just helped me along in making this decision to go.
And it certainly was a big decision. I mean, I can see where maybe some would be thinking or feeling that you're maybe unnecessarily digging up your family's history or going, things that have been put to rest for some that, you're now unraveling and wanting to get to the bottom of.
Mhm.
Was there any sort of resistance as you're sort of going through that process?
By the other people or
Yes.
by, so yeah, so there was only one person in Germany that I was meeting with, and it was obviously a significant person. I just described who they were.
Hmm.
And I was very conscious with myself about not wanting to stir that up. In fact, I didn't even initially let him know that my family lived in that place. I just said that our ancestors were neighbors. That's all I
Okay.
said.
Okay.
And he slowly figured out the rest on his own and asked questions. And I let him guide me. I didn't want to stir up the pot. He's a decent, nice person. Our values align. I didn't want to make him feel in any way bad or anything negative. I just wanted to build relationship. And so I was very conscious about not bringing up anything that might make him feel uncomfortable or icky about where he lives. So I never brought that up. I only answered his questions.
Mm. Yeah, no, very, 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 very brave to come face to face, with something so powerful. You talked about hearing stories from your father that you never heard before. Um, were these significant pieces that you're now coming to face with, or because I'm imagining over the years you sort of just heard of it. Maybe was the story sort of glossed over and this is more detailed, or what was that you're now hearing?
Well, I knew that he was in hiding.
Hmm.
And what I remember as from my childhood was that he was hiding underground. He was underground. And so what I pictured was a basement, like the basement I had growing up, like a dark, dank basement. That's all I pictured. That's all I really knew. I knew the name of the family whose farm he was hiding on.
Okay. Hmm.
But when I got deeper into it, what I learned from his testimony video was that he was in the attic of a barn, not in
Mm,
a basement. So that was the underground. I understand where that word comes from now, but as a child, I didn't understand that. So he never told me that he was in the attic of a barn above the cow stall where it smelled, where there were fleas,
mm,
where his mother and grandmother had to sleep on a bed of hay and his own sleeping arrangement on like car bench seats. He never told me any of that of
right.
those details. And he
Well,
also never told me about how he got into hiding,
right.
who brought them there,
Right.
or any of the traumatic things that happened. He never told me those things.
And so the trauma that he dealt with, was that visible to you at all, or were you able to recognize that or see that he was dealing with?
In retrospect, I understand that he was traumatized. Yeah.
Mm,
And he was a very anxious person with a quirky nature. He wasn't mean.
right.
He was very loving, but there were clearly problems that were not spoken about. But as a child, I he died when I was 33. So I was still pretty young and hadn't
Sure.
come to fully know him. So I always knew something was off, but I didn't understand it until I started really delving into it. And I could see, oh, he had PTSD.
Right. Right.
Um, and that's how he lived his life. And he tried to protect us from it. But now we all know that it doesn't work so well when you try to keep it under the covers, because
Right.
then the next generation inherits it.
Right. And it just sort of continues. You talk again that generational trauma that continues and
Mhm.
continues and continues. Um, at what point did you recognize that what you were going through? Again, it's easy. It's sort of
Mhm.
after the fact we can look back and go, oh, and we can pinpoint it. But in the moment, we've got no idea. When did you finally come to the realization?
I remember this so clearly. I was sitting at my dining room table, eating my lunch, listening to NPR.
Okay.
And there was a new author who was being interviewed. Her name is Elizabeth Rosner. And she had just written a book called Survivor Cafe, which was about she and her father, who was a survivor also, going back to Germany to these cafes they had in the 80s or 90s, where descendants of German perpetrators met with descendants of Holocaust survivors, and they had conversations. And she used the term intergenerational trauma, and she described it. And my light bulb went off, like, oh my gosh, that is exactly what it is. And I got her book, and it's right next to me all the time, because it gave me the vocabulary I needed to totally understand what was going on with me. So that was the moment I got it.
No, and when that light bulb goes off, oftentimes it happens, Irene, is it just opens, like the floodgates open and the heavens and the skies, like, oh my gosh, and you see things so differently, or even at least understand why things happen the way they did, right? So I would imagine you experienced a lot of that.
Absolutely. And, when you have a word for a feeling that you have, it makes
Yes.
a huge difference. I never understood that before, but it really does something psychologically, I guess. So that then enabled me to talk about it in a way that um, was meaningful. I could put words to things. And in my book, I actually write about this inherited trauma I have. And I have some examples of things that don't even make sense, that I react certain ways. It's not rational,
Right.
but
Right.
but I understand now where it comes from, and I can deal with it a little bit better.
I was thinking that as you're going through the preparation or writing these stories, how much that can aid in your own personal healing, and maybe in some respects, it could be seen as therapeutic in some respects, right?
Mhm.
Where you're talking out loud, or you're as you said, putting words to feelings. Was that an experience that you had?
Yeah, very much so. People talk about journaling a lot, and the
Mhm.
value of journaling to
Yes.
process. I never was a journaler. That wasn't my thing, but now I understand the value of it, right? So when I was first kind of brain dumping my book, my very initial words from the book for the book, a lot of what came out was my childhood. This wasn't going to be a memoir. This was going
Okay.
to be strictly about my father.
Hmm.
But as I was writing, I was realizing things about myself from my childhood that were so important and really formed how I'm viewing my father's story. And so it morphed into being a memoir. But my writing those things, or my writing in the first place, that helped bring out stuff that was obviously somewhere inside of me that I didn't remember, was a huge part of my healing process.
Right. Right.
And even, I would write parts of the book and cry, and I would rewrite and cry every time. And even today, when I do readings of certain parts of the book, um, about my story, but also about weird coincidences that happen, I still cry sometimes. It's like still um, healing me, I guess,
Yes.
this
Yes.
process.
Well, it was a real life experience for you. This wasn't, although it's in a book, it was more than just
Yeah,
a story, right? This is
right.
something that you experienced and lived. Was your father still alive when you started the writing process, or this
Oh,
happened
no.
it was all afterwards?
Yeah, I started writing in 2019, and my first trip to Germany was 2018. So
Okay.
he was long past.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
And I
So,
so wish he would have been able to go with me, because, the
mm,
Germany of today is so very different than, certainly, than what he experienced, but even the Germany of the 80s, it's very different. And I think he would enjoy being there now, but, unfortunately that isn't to be.
I was going to ask if we could just pretend for a moment, like if he was here today and you said, "Let's go to Germany," what would his reaction be?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to know, because I don't know how he would have processed the last 20 years of changes there, or
Mm,
but if I, I would like to think he would have gone along with me, especially to see our ancestral hometowns. And then while we're at it, we'd have to go to these other places. I know he went back to Holland, actually. So he
Okay.
did go back there where he spent all of his time, during the war. And he went to all of his places in Holland. But he didn't even tell me much about that trip in 1991.
Why do you think there was so much left out? Like he didn't share with you?
Well, I assume that he didn't want to cause me pain by
Okay.
telling me the painful stories. And that's true for a lot of children of Holocaust survivors who don't know their parents' story. We all assume it's because they didn't want to cause us the pain. They just want to move on with their lives,
Sure.
live, in this case, he came to America, live the American dream for his kids, which he did. He had an 8th grade education. He
Mm,
worked really hard in a manual labor kind of job, sent us to college. And, here we are living a really good life in America. So I think that's what he wanted to achieve, which he did. But I don't think he understood that I needed to know the stories
sure.
too.
Sure. No, I get that. I get that. I wonder if we sort of could talk about maybe specifics of his survival story. I know, for example, I know there's a reference in the book about 18 people that helped the family survive, and so I wonder, is there a specific story or aspects of the story that you could share that can help really just paint a vivid picture of what the experiences were?
Well, I'll tell you about the descendant of the man who hid my family.
Okay.
So my father, my grandmother, and my great grandmother went into hiding in 1942 on a farm called the Lonsink farm. The family name was Lonsink.
Okay.
And so the man we met knew my father because my father had been in touch with him and visited with him in 1991. And um, and so it was his father and grandfather who hid my family. And so I wanted to reconnect with him. I wasn't in touch with him after my father died. We couldn't communicate because he didn't speak English and I didn't speak Dutch. So
Mm,
when I was planning my visit, I reached out to the local synagogue and they decided to take it upon themselves to find this man. And they did. First phone call, they found him.
hmm.
And so we were able to meet with him to reconnect. And he brought us to the attic where my father was hidden, because that's where he used to live as well. And
Right.
so I could see the place where my father, his mother, and grandmother survived for 2.5 years. And I could play the part of the testimony video where my father explains how this area was set up. And so some of the things that I didn't already describe were that, they had some radios that were all illegal. You could be shot for having a radio in
Mm,
in occupied territories there.
right. Right.
And my father used to listen to the radio every day. He would listen to the BBC with his headphones on. This all he described in his video. He never told me this. And also Queen Wilhelmina, the Queen of the Netherlands in exile, would speak every week as well and to the people of Holland. But anyway, he heard on the BBC about what was going on at Auschwitz-Birkenau and how people were being gassed and cremated. And he knew, he says in the video, that his father was in that group, which he was right.
Mm,
His father was killed at Auschwitz-Birkenau.
right.
Um, but hearing him describe this as a 16-year-old or 15-year-old, he's listening to the BBC, hearing about what probably happened to his father, and choosing to not tell his mother or grandmother about it, which of course they would find out anyway.
Sure.
Uh, so that moment for me, um, I just wanted to hug him, and say it's okay. But I couldn't have done that because he's not here anymore.
Right. Right.
And you can
Yeah.
see it's
Yeah.
still right. It's
No, no,
still pretty fresh.
well, as you're talking, I'm visualizing images as well, and the feelings assigned with that. So that it's not, it's no, it's something I definitely don't take lightly, and I appreciate you for sharing and thank you. Um, Irene, why was the video done, and why is it that that video only turned up years later that you were able to see it? Like, what can you talk
Mm.
about that?
So these testimony videos are done. And there's a lot of Holocaust survivors record their testimony video. Usually they're done professionally by the USC Shoah Foundation or the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. But my father's doesn't seem to have been done by a professional group. It seems like it was just an individual interviewing him and somebody recording it.
Right.
There's some telltale signs that it isn't in any of the archives or databases anywhere. So I and my brother assume that he just wanted us to have the story. I don't think he gave it to us while he was still alive. I think right after he died, in my memory, his close friend sent it to my brother and to me. And so I guess he didn't want to talk about it, but he wanted us to know about it.
Right.
So like I said, when I first received it in 1994, which is the year he died, I watched it, I put it away. I didn't have time to try to figure out what he was talking about, what the chronology was.
Right.
And I always had in my mind that, maybe there's a chapter in my book called Maybe Someday I would get back to it. And that someday finally arrived in 2017. And I described some of the reasons, the politics and the violence going on in this country was very, very concerning to me, and obviously still is. And I had some time, my kids were grown. I had a week off from work. I wasn't going anywhere. So I dug up that video, which was on VHS tape. I had it converted to something I could actually play in my computer. And I sat at my desk the rest of that week transcribing my father's testimony video. And in order to transcribe it, by the way, he English wasn't his first language, so he doesn't use the syntax we use.
Right.
He paused a lot, and I had a hard time typing it. I can type fast. So what I ended up doing, because my Google transcriber wouldn't understand his accent, I had to repeat word for word what my father was saying into the transcriber, and it wrote it out for me, and then I went and fixed it. And so I felt that process made me feel like I was in the story almost,
Yes.
like it took me into the story.
Yes.
And then I became consumed with it. And so that's how I came to get that video out again and really obsess over it. That is what I would call it. I was obsessed.
And I could see that, especially the part of being absorbed into the story, and the uniqueness even of the story is the fact that you're telling the story of your father, where there's and there've been memoirs and books and things written about the Holocaust, but yours is a very, very different perspective. No, as equally as important, without question, but still very, very different than a lot are out there. Have you seen others that do to take a similar take, or is very unique?
Right. So you're right. A lot of the Holocaust memoirs are by the survivors.
Yes.
And now, and I feel like as a second generation, I have a story to tell too. It's my story. It doesn't make the survivor stories any less important. They are as important as ever, and they always will be. But the next generation has to carry on, and there is a value to telling our stories too. And so there haven't been that many second generation stories yet, because the survivors are still telling their stories, or their children are still getting their stories.
Gotcha.
So it is unique. And although I'm seeing a few more 2G second generation books come out in the past couple of months, actually.
Oh, wow.
But, maybe I started a trend.
Maybe you did, and that would be a great thing, because I think, particularly around the piece about the intergenerational trauma, to be able to write this story means you've got to confront a lot of things, as you very well know.
Right.
And so, if and for some, because again, we all get to that point at different stages of our lives, and so when you got to your point, you understood what you needed to do, and maybe for others they haven't reached there yet. So I think being able to sort of lay the found work, or be the trailblazer, so to speak, is very, very important, because what that enables others to be able to do is tell their story, or at least understand that they have a story to tell.
Yeah, I hope that's what it helps do. And I hope people who feel that trauma but maybe haven't named it will be willing to read the book, because it's hard. It's a hard book, but it's also a very uplifting book, because the focus is also on those 18 people that helped my family survive, and about my finding healing. So there's a lot uplifting in it.
Got you. So, the tracking down to these 18 people, like how that must have been a process in itself to figure out.
My father made that kind of easy because he's the one who named them in his testimony video.
Okay.
So he either knew the names of almost all of them. I think the limousine driver who took them to the border crossing, when they escaped, he didn't name the name, but he did describe the car and how it was decorated because it came from a wedding. So I know what the car looked like. But he named the other people, or gave me enough information that I was eventually able to find out the names of the people. But I'd love to share one amazing story,
Sure,
if I
please.
may. Another amazing story. So I mentioned that my father went to Holland in 1991, and I didn't know too much about it, but I knew that he went back to one of the towns where he had escaped into, and his family was arrested that day that they escaped because they were illegal border crossers. And it turns out that what I'll call the good police arrested them and held them in protective custody. Otherwise, they'd be sent back.
Right.
And eventually, the Queen of the Netherlands gave all Jews a stay, allowing them to remain in Holland. So my father in 1991 wanted to go back and locate whatever he could about this arrest, right? He was 12 at the time. He might not have known too much of what was going on other than he was arrested. So it turns out that 3 weeks prior to his visit, the man in the archives named Peter happened across an arrest report from 1938 of the Stern family, which was my family. And he looked at it with a colleague of his and said, "This is very interesting. It's too bad we'll never know whatever happened to the Stern family." 3 weeks later, my father arrives and says, "I'm looking for information about this arrest made of the Stern family in 1938. And Peter finds the report. That he says, "We just found this report, and now Peter knows what happened to the Stern family." And then fast forward 30 years later, because I didn't know any of this. I didn't know how my father got the report or whatever, but there were names in it. I received a chapter of a book written in Dutch about an interview that this man, Peter, did with my father. And I found Peter through some amazing steps. And Peter told me, Peter was amazed that he and I connected. And he told me that that experience with my father was the most rewarding experience of his entire career as an archivist. So that was a long way of answering your question, but an amazing story that just is an example of how I came to find certain information. That police report had the name of the arresting police officer, the town mayor who helped save them, and the man whose house they were at when they were arrested. So that's how I found 3 of those names.
Boy, Irene, I gotta tell you, man, your private detective skills it definitely enhanced. It sounds like at least you found another calling, right? Being able to dig up the way you did.
It's very rewarding. I can see why people do that for a living.
Yeah, for sure. There's a part. It also seems, as you sort of talk about the pieces that were left behind, and again, and we'll never have any way of knowing, but it almost seems like maybe your father wanted you to tell this story and left just enough information that you could have, and because it just seems that you got just what you needed to be able to complete this story, which is fascinating. I love it. It really is. We'll never know, of course, but you can't help but wonder.
It's funny you say that, because in the book, in a couple of places where these amazing coincidences happened, I say that, like, I wonder if my father guided me there or guided people to me. I don't necessarily believe that the universe works like that, but it's hard to dismiss it when these things kept happening. So I do bring that up in the book because I question, is that true? I may never know, or I might know one day when I go see him up in heaven.
That'd be a great conversation for sure. I'd
Yeah.
love to let's give the title to our listeners: "Shattered Stars, Healing Hearts, Unraveling My Father's Holocaust Survival Story."
Yes.
Very, very powerful title. I wonder if you could explain, particularly "Shattered Stars" and "Healing Hearts" title.
Yeah, the last part tells us what the story is about. So the shattered stars are two words I had, I think, even before I started writing. They just resonated with me. So my family's last name was Stern, in German, Stern,
Yeah.
and the translation into English for that word is star. So shattered stars. The Stern family was shattered when
Mm,
on Kristallnacht, which was November 10th, 1938, when their home and business was destroyed and they were
yeah.
forced to flee. So the family was destroyed. And then the healing hearts part is my story part of it, where I unexpectedly find this path toward healing and reconciliation. So
Mm.
it's, Shattered Stars is my father's story, Healing Hearts is my story, and I've intertwined them in the book by
Um,
my father's chronology.
well, it's such a wonderful manner to tell a story, to honor your father, to for the legacy of your family is so there's so many levels on this that really resonate with me, and I congratulate you. And one last thing, Irene, I want to ask you, and again, I really appreciate you being here today and sharing your story with our audience. There's certainly I would imagine that there's some specific things, and as much the story was written to get on your father's legacy and for yourself some healing. I'd imagine there's something that you're looking for readers to sort of walk away with.
Mm.
And while in my mind I've got my own ideas, I'd love to hear
Hmm.
from yourself what you're looking for to have the readers leave with.
Oh, thank you for that question. So I think there are two main things I would love for my readers to leave with. One is the inspiration to be one of those upstanders, to emulate what those 18 people did who helped my family to survive in some small way, to be the light, to be the spark that shines in this world, to take action and not be a bystander, because standing by is action and it is complicity, and that's not okay. And I'm hoping my readers come away inspired to do more than what they currently are doing. And the other is that, there's hope for healing. If we are able to confront the traumas or inherited traumas that we have, there is hope for healing. And I hope people who are struggling with that can see it, can believe it more fully, and maybe they will be come away with a little something they can do to switch it a little bit for themselves. That I really hope that will be the case.
Yeah, no, I mean, the first part, as you were answering, I was thinking that's just says be audacious, like step out and take
Mhm.
action. And we sort of, at the very part of the conversation, we talked about the importance of audaciousness. And so hearing that is so powerful. And again, the stories of the resilience and the courage and all the things and all the themes that come out of that. And then, of course, the healing and the growth as well. They're all significant themes. And thank you, Irene, for being here and sharing this. For our listeners who get their own copy of the book or catch up with you directly, where could we send them?
So you can go to my website, which is shatteredstars.org. So I'll spell it ShatteredStars, all one word, .org. And there's a link there to Amazon where you can buy the book. And there's a contact page or a connect page where you can contact me. And I'd love to talk to anybody who wants to reach out, who wants to schedule a presentation. I want to mention this. I tell my father's story together with my father in our presentation, and hopefully inspire people in person in an audience to be the light.
So beautiful, so beautiful. And again, when you can encourage people to be the light and be that star, and help others, and to get to that pathway of healing and growth and all those wonderful things. It's just a beautiful experience to be a part of. And so, thank you, Irene. This has been fantastic. I really appreciated our conversation and the time. And congratulations I congratulate on a bevy of things, but certainly the legacy of your father and honoring his memory and your family story. So I appreciate you. Take care and all the best.
Thank you so much for the great work you do, Audley. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too.
You know, in our conversation with Irene, she shared how uncovering her father's untold story led to a profound sense of healing and transformation. By bravely confronting the past, Irene found a path to healing that she never knew was possible. Her journey serves as a powerful reminder of the resilience of the human spirit and the importance of honoring our ancestors' stories. If Irene's story resonates with you and you'd like to connect with her directly, I'd encourage you to reach out to her through the contact details provided in the show notes. Sharing experiences and supporting each other on our path to healing can be incredibly impactful. Thank you for tuning into the Audacious Living Podcast. If you've enjoyed today's episode with Irene and found inspiration in her story, we invite you to like, follow, or share the podcast with others who may benefit from these empowering conversations. Together, we can continue to grow and support each other in living audaciously. Until next time, stay safe, be kind, show love to one another, and be audacious.
You've been listening to the Audacious Living Podcast, hosted by Audley Stevenson. If you enjoyed what you heard, be sure to like, subscribe, and share. Until next time, be audacious.